Alexander Osterwalder. Is that correct?
Perfect.
Mais ou
Perfect.
menos. E depois o crédito dele pega que ele é
co-founder of Strategizer.
Okay. Então, the first question, Alexander, what is innovation?
There are lots of types of innovation. There's technology innovation, process innovation, product innovation. The type of innovation that I focus on is business model innovation. And that's slightly different because you use technology, use product innovation, but to come up with different business models, better business models that replace what we've done before. Sometimes that doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm. What is business model innovation, and what are the steps for a company to create or innovate its business model?
So basically, business models are about how you create, deliver, and capture value. Okay, so that's the basics of what a business model is. And we need business model innovation today because a lot of the old business models expired. So typically, if you look at the music industry, the business model doesn't work anymore. If you look at the pharmaceutical industry, the business model that was traditionally very strong and allowed pharmaceutical companies to grow, it expired. It doesn't work anymore. So we need to find new ways to create value, to deliver value, to capture value. So that's what business model innovation is about. And it's about creating the business models of the future that can create sustainable profits.
Mm-hmm. Does the use of business... Opa, pode ser? Does the use of business model canvas substitute the need of business plan?
So it's slightly different. If you want, a business plan is an execution document. And business plans work when you know what exactly you're doing, when you know the environment, usually when you do something that's not very new. Now, when you do something that is different, something that you haven't done in a market that you don't know very well yet with different types of innovation, business plans don't work. And the reason is that no customer listens to what you write in your business plan. So business plans fail. So what you want to do actually is use the business model canvas as a document that you can rapidly iterate while you're testing your business model in the market. So there are two different tools that have a different function. The business plan is an execution document that you can use once you really know that what you want to do is going to work. The business model canvas is a document that allows you to shape your ideas, to figure out what could work, and to test in the market. So you have to iterate a lot rapidly and test with customers until you can really prove that what you want to do is going to work.
What is the relation between the business model canvas and the process of lean thinking?
So there's this movement called Lean Startup that was invented, if you want, originally by Steve Blank with the customer development process, and then extended with Agile Engineering by Eric Ries. And this process is really about trying to test your ideas before you implement them. So you don't build something or create a business model that is not going to work because the risk of failure would be very big. And where the business model canvas comes in is it allows you to shape your ideas and track your ideas while you're testing them. So you use the business model canvas. Steve Blank would say, the father of the Lean Startup movement, would call this a scoreboard, where you actually use it as a visual tool to shape your ideas throughout this Lean Startup process where you test your ideas. So they're very complementary and they go hand in hand. And I see this as a tool set, different types of tools and processes that you use together in order to succeed.
Mm-hmm. How do you define entrepreneurship?
Entrepreneurship is craziness first. But it's really about trying to figure out what customers want by talking to a lot of customers, by testing your ideas, by seeing patterns, and by being passionate about your ideas, and then start building them. But what you really need to do is just try, experiment. And what entrepreneurship is about is not fearing failure. So if you really want to build something new, there will inevitably be a lot of failures along the way. But failure is good if you learn from failure, and the failure isn't very costly. So entrepreneurship, to an extent, is a lot of failure, learning, and then improving until you really nailed that idea that is going to work. That's what entrepreneurship is about.
Is there other tips that you can say for a person willing to open a business?
I think experimentation is the number one tip, trying out things. So what I wouldn't do is think very hard about your idea and write a business plan. That's the last thing you want to do. So thinking hard is fine, but what you really want to do is try out things very quickly, make prototypes of the products that you want to make, try to sell them before they actually exist, and learn from that, and be fearless, and try out things, so you can learn what do customers really want, what don't they want, and by doing that, you'll minimize the risk of big failure. So don't take a lot of time to write a business plan. Go out there and experiment. And that goes for small entrepreneurs, but also for big entrepreneurs who want to build large factories. The bigger the investment, actually, the more you want to test. So these are not just tools that go for small-scale startups, but it's throughout the range. And what's interesting, what we've seen with the Business Model Canvas, is that people from all different backgrounds come and use these tools. That's from the doctor who wants to improve his practice, hospitals, all the way to large companies like GE and Procter & Gamble. They all use these tools today to minimize their risk and to increase their success chances.
How do you analyze the Brazilian scenario of entrepreneurship, and what can be done as to foster it?
So what's really interesting is, and what surprised us is, Brazil, if you look at our website, businessmodelgeneration.com, Brazil is actually the second biggest country in terms of visitors, which means that there's a lot of interest for these tools around Business Model Canvas and the Lean Startup movement. So there seems to be a passion for these tools, which I think is very good because we need these kind of tools to succeed. So I think there's a very good basis. Now, of course, we can get better at using these tools. So I think there needs to be a big effort to train people to use these kind of tools and processes. The Business Model Canvas, the Value Proposition Canvas, the Customer Development Process. And the analogy I like to make is the comparison between surgeons and entrepreneurs, or people who build businesses or innovate in companies. A surgeon is trained for 13 years to use tools before he or she operates on a real person, right? Now, in entrepreneurship or innovation, we think just by reading a book or looking at a couple of tools, we can do it just like that. But that's not the truth. There needs to be a training. It's now becoming a serious profession to be an entrepreneur and an innovator. So we need to teach those tools, and we need to put a lot of effort into that so we become business surgeons, if you want.
Very good. Querem mais alguma?
I have one more question. I don't know if
Vem aqui, vem aqui.
I don't know if it's a question for the interview, but it's something that I wanted to hear from you.
Very good.
Personal. Generally,
Pera, deixa ele responder. Você consegue chegar dentro? Só se passar. Isso.
Generally, we see that universities or institutions that support small businesses and entrepreneurship, they are focused on teaching tools like management, human resources management in general.
Yeah.
But they don't teach how to be an entrepreneur, how to open a business, or what you have to do.
Right.
So
I can look in there.
Tem que ser nesse mesmo nível. Fica abaixo.
I can look at her when I answer.
Yeah.
You will think that you're there. I will. You can.
So I want to hear more from you about it. Like, do you agree with that? Do you agree with that most of universities and institutions that try to foster entrepreneurship, they're more focused on teaching the management and not teaching how to be an entrepreneur, how to open a business, how to test it, how to prototype, and kind of things?
It's changing, so I'll answer to you. Okay, so traditionally in business schools, we teach the tools of execution. And the reason is very simple. Businesses didn't change as dramatically as they change today. So what was important is to be very good at accounting, to be very good at marketing, to be very good at finance. So it was normal to teach these tools of execution. The problem is that today the landscape has changed, and entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, so innovating inside of a company, has become much more important. And the difference is that the tools of execution just don't work in this space. When you create new ideas, when you create new businesses, there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of risk. So execution is your smallest problem, actually, to start with. Your biggest problem is to learn how to deal with uncertainty, to test your ideas to decrease the risk while you're trying to figure out what is going to work. So I do think there's a transition today in business schools, in education, to teach besides the execution part, which won't go away, that remains important, also the entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship part. But that's a very different topic. And what we need to understand is that in existing companies, we need something what some academics, Kotter calls the dual operating system. In existing companies, we need an execution culture to execute the known and successful business models. And besides that, we need to create a new culture, which is about creating new ideas, testing new ideas, experimenting until we can figure out what to build. Because those new business models that we build will slowly replace the old ones. If you don't do that and you just focus on execution, what is going to happen to you is the Kodak moment. Kodak disappeared. At their peak, they had 140,000 employees. Can you imagine that? And they went bankrupt because they were unable to invent new business models while they were successful. They were actually good at technology innovation, so they helped invent the digital camera, but they couldn't figure out a business model around the digital camera. So they, to a certain extent, through innovation, they killed themselves. They dug their own grave by being innovative in technology innovation, but not creating a culture of entrepreneurship. So what we really need to teach today at business schools is this dual operating system, executing existing business models that work, and at the same time, simultaneously, creating a parallel culture of innovation, of entrepreneurship. If we can't do both, then as a company, we risk disappearing. And it's happening more and more.
I have one more question.
Yep.
Is it easier for small businesses to innovate their business model in comparison with large businesses? Like, what are the opportunities for small businesses to innovate their business model?
Yeah. So, obviously, if you are a startup or a small business, you have different constraints than if you're a large business. Some things are easier in a large business, and some things are easier in a small business. What you usually have in a small business is a leadership that is very committed and can change things very rapidly. So things can go very fast. You can create new cultures, you can experiment. In large companies, it's slightly more complicated because you have processes throughout the large beast, if you want. You have political games that are going on. So the context is slightly different. But what you do have in large companies, what you don't always have in smaller companies, is access to different types of resources, like big brand names, like financial resources, like certain skills that you might not have in smaller businesses. On the other hand, I do think that smaller businesses can be much faster, and they should use this advantage to innovate and to change. And we're seeing now a couple of medium-sized businesses and small businesses using the business model canvas to drastically change what they're doing. For example, moving from products to services, which sounds very innocent, but actually has a big change of the business model, as an implication. But what you really need is this commitment of the leadership to drastically change. And that is not always there, but it's happening more and more because of the pressures of a globalized world where everybody competes against everybody. So business model innovation is going to become a fact of life for large companies and for small companies. And we need to use the advantages that we have, either as a small company or as a large company.
I have one more. The last one.
Yeah, no problem. No worries.
I promise you. But since this program is going to be presented to small businesses, is there a specific path, methodology to be used in order to create a business model, like use design thinking and other methodologies to use?
Yeah.
Like, how can you do that?
Yeah. So you can almost call this a tool stack or a toolbox, right? There are different things that you need to master in order to become good at this. And the two tools that we invented, if you want, is the business model canvas and the value proposition canvas, which is like a hammer and a screwdriver, right? But then you have also certain attitudes that you need to have. So typically, this design thinking movement, working like a designer, like an architect or a product designer, that is something that's very important because designers are very good at visualizing ideas, at prototyping ideas, at experimenting. So that is a very, very important mindset that you need to have when you use these tools. And then you have the processes of customer development and lean startup, which even goes beyond the mindset, which is really about how do you test your ideas before you execute them. So this is what we call the search for the right business model, the search for the right value proposition, where you stress test your ideas with customers, where the goal is not necessarily to sell, but to learn what could really work. And once you've figured it out, once you've nailed it and you've used all these tools and processes and mindsets in the right way, you will see what's going to work, and there won't be much risk in the execution. And then you might want to write a business plan, because then you're in the phase where you're going to execute your business and you're going to scale your business. So this is how the tools and processes and mindsets really work together.
Parece? Ok. Só um minutinho, por favor.
Ainda tem. Christine, I'm going to spell your last name. It's Pfeiffer, right?
Mm-hmm. Pfeiffer is perfect.
Silêncio, por favor. Obrigado.
Christine with CH.
Você quer encostar a luz,
CHR.
o pezinho da luz na...
Não, eu tenho medo que alguém apareça.
O lixo, algum case?
Pode ser.
Ha.
Estamos rodando, viu?
Então vamos lá. A sonora é com a Christine Pfeiffer. Ela é secretária, nossa, eu tinha anotado tudo isso, depois eu passo, do INSME, que é o International Network for Small and Medium Enterprises. Vamos lá. Christine, how does INSME work?
Okay, how does INSME work? INSME is a network based in Rome, in Italy, funded by the Italian government, the Italian Ministry for Economic Development, and the OECD, with the aim to foster international cooperation, technology transfer, and innovation towards small and medium enterprises. The members are not themselves small and medium enterprises, but they are intermediaries and multipliers, as governments, financial actors. Like, for example, here in Brazil, we have Sebrae as our member. They are also board members, so they are very active since the beginning of our network to discuss on important issues on innovation and technology transfer towards SMEs. So what they do is, what we do all together is discussing best practices from different perspectives on how to help SMEs, small and medium enterprises.
And what is the role of the institution, talking about small and medium enterprise, and how it can be a tool to develop entrepreneurship internationally?
Yeah, it is quite a good tool because it offers diverse services for entrepreneurs, but mainly for multipliers. So for the people that shall help small and medium enterprises in the single countries to strengthen the capabilities, the innovation capabilities of the small and medium enterprises. So there is, for example, an INSME Academy, which is an online-based, webinar-based platform where we offer once per month a training session, and the speakers are coming from all over the world because INSME is a global platform. So this is the added value. This is, first of all, a global platform. Currently, we have more than 43 countries represented. And the second thing is that we are different stakeholders. So not only one group of stakeholders, but inputs are coming from industrial representatives, from financial actors, from policymakers, more and more from academy, from also large enterprises that are all involved. So this is the tool that we offer services, events, training, also classroom trainings to make entrepreneurs learn, and especially multipliers, because they would go back to Brazil in this case and adapt it to your local content and launch the new policies or the new practices in your country. So that's the tool to do better entrepreneurship in the future. Let's hope that's the desire.
They made a question about the role of Sebrae in this scenario. I'm going to ask you about this. Would Sebrae have a role at fostering entrepreneurship abroad?
Yes. Sebrae, as I said before, is a board member of INSME and involved since the beginning of the first days of our network when it was planned. It was still planned, and we have been created thanks to the Bologna Charter of the OECD, so an official document. Sebrae has been involved since then, and you have a lot of very positive services and portfolio of services to showcase from Brazil. And what I'm doing also here now is taking your good practices and boost it into the network so that other countries may take it up and use the same tools as you use here. So things that have already been developed, no need to reinvent the wheel. It is working in Brazil. You have to maybe adapt it to the needs of Korea, for example, but they will take up the knowledge of Sebrae, and Sebrae is sharing very actively, and this is how it works normally. So the tool is to share knowledge and readapt it and recombine it for the other entrepreneurs in the world.
Is there a path for an entrepreneur to be successful? A kind of formula?
It's a very nice question. What I can see, as in my role as a Secretary General, I'm traveling a lot. What I see, and what also the OECD is studying, is that entrepreneurs mainly have two real difficulties. One is access to finance, and there are many discussions about how to overcome it, and Brazil has a lot of expertise in this regard, and again Sebrae has a fund for entrepreneurs on credit guarantee. There are also talks about crowdfunding, venture capitalist attraction, open innovation platforms. So first of all, find an alternative way to come to credit, and secondly, do open innovation, be connected, be in a network, because this is the only way I suppose you will match the requests of the market of tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So good ideas can come only from collaboration, because if you are a small enterprise, you need links, you need your network to really develop and become successful.
Mm-hmm. How do you analyze the Brazilian scenario of entrepreneurship?
What I have seen so far is very positive. This is why many global players come to Brazil and are, like for example, Kaufman Foundation and others. You have a huge internal market. This is something which is on the one hand very positive, because you might start to export, let's say, in between the different states of Brazil. On the other side, you shouldn't miss the moment to think about internationalization and to think global, to really start by many products of today are born global, so they are not made for a specific reference market, but thanks to the internet, to all the logistical possibilities we have today, can be easily exported to other places of the world. And this is what I don't really see now, because there's a lot of effort to link large enterprise with small business. You should even open up to internationalization and involve directly the global supply chain.
Mm-hmm. And how do you put Brazil, comparing with other countries, in the same level of Brazil?
I think Brazil is doing quite well. You can see the numbers, not myself to tell you, but it's the numbers to show. There is still, what I learned also from today, a gap between competitiveness and productivity. If you turn it the opposite way around, it means you have potential margin to do better. And I see Sebrae is really working on this part, but what should be done is capacity building, let's say, innovation management trainings for those entrepreneurs to really take up and to come and conquer the international market. So this is what I see, and I think this is in the pipeline, but innovation management training shall be the next thing. So I see Brazil's enterprises are really on the same level like many others, but okay, infrastructure might be a problem, a deal, and sometimes language can be also a deal, but you have such a beautiful language, so but I think this is organized in cycles, so that will come up quite in the next future. And you obviously have the possibility to have a big market, a big internal market, and this is why you are somehow in a comfortable position at the moment to really develop and increase your sales and increase your employment rate.
So there is a potential.
Yes, and I think you are really exploiting it already, but if you look at the exports or if you look at small business enterprises, there is still margin to do better, because even if 99%, I guess was the number this morning, is small enterprise, they do not really generate a lot of the GDP. So that means productivity shall be raised. So this is a common problem. It's not only in Brazil, it's in many other countries too. But thanks to innovation management training, I think you can really accelerate here.
Mm-hmm. What is innovation?
What is innovation? Innovation, I would give the definition as follows. I think it is reassessing things that are already existing on the market and reselling them, recombining them, creating a product or a service which is relevant to the market, for which people will pay. Some others cynically say that it means foresee the needs of tomorrow, foresee what the society is willing to buy, to invest in tomorrow, or even somehow write what the people want to know. For example, an iPhone. It is not an advertising, it is just a case. I think nobody thought 10 years ago we would really need all the features that are now on an iPhone. But given the fact that somebody else has presented it, we are all running after it and we are all very happy to pay for it. So this is foreseeing the needs of the market of tomorrow and investing in it.
Mm-hmm. What are... What are the tools and methodologies to be used for enterprise in order to improve its management, products, and process?
Oh, there is a variety of tools. I can just mention an example from our network. It is called Improve. It is a benchmark to assess your performance on innovation management capabilities. So innovation is considered as a house of innovation with a strategy on top, with enabling factors as fundament. And what you do is really assess your project management, your idea management, the culture of innovation you foster inside the company.
Pode seguir, pode deixar.
Pode seguir, a gente... What are the tools and methodologies to be used for enterprise in order to improve its management, product, and process?
Yeah, there are many different models that are currently on the market. Let me take one example from our members. It is called Improve. It is a benchmarking tool to assess your proper innovation management capabilities, considering innovation as a house. So on the top you have the strategy, on the back you have the enabling factors. You analyze the life cycle, the processes, the organizational structure, the culture of innovation in your own business, and that helps to really know if you have strategic partnerships, if you can collaborate with your neighbor, if you are ready for internationalization. So this is making your own capability, on the one hand, to grow, on the other hand, to work with large enterprises. That was a little bit also topic of today. If you don't speak the same language as a large enterprise, it will be very difficult to do the same forecast, to make sure you are in the supply chain, you play your role, you remain competitive. So this is more or less. Innovation has nothing to do only with product innovation. It is always linked to service innovation. It is linked to business model innovation, to process innovation, and as we would say in Europe now, also to social innovation, to all the sustainability concept that is in line with it, because you can easily market it, and the market is currently asking for it, especially in Europe and in North America. So this is, for example, this is just a tool. There are many other tools. There are tools, also physical tools for acceleration of entrepreneurs. There are virtual acceleration models. There is quite a lot of tools around. Also, Sebrae has a lot of programs and tools to go through. The important thing is that you consider innovation management as part of your mindset. So inside the company, even if you are 3 people, it is very important to speak the same language as a large enterprise, to make sure you do the right forecast and to develop in the future.
Mm-hmm. You show us an image, the cat chasing the little mouse, to mention the medium and small enterprise. It's always that struggle to small enterprise in order to find their place in the value chain.
Let's say, from my experience, it is perceived as such. Small and medium-sized enterprises are the backbone of world economy, not just Brazil, not just Europe, worldwide. They do not always generate the same level of GDP as we saw in Brazil, for example. 99% is small enterprise, but they generate something like 25% of the GDP. So this is the gap of productivity, and that's what they face. This is the feeling they have, like the little mouse, Tom and Jerry, the scene you mentioned. They are running, and have to continuously adapt to the dynamic changing of the environment, the business environment. Yes, so it is perceived as such, but as we also said, is that they have more creativity, more flexibility to come out. In fact, the mouse is not taken by the cat at the end, so it's, let's say, somehow more adapting to the needs of the moment and escaping and doing a great job. But it is for sure a challenge. It is a challenge for small and medium enterprises in a globalized world at the moment marked by financial crisis. They have touched the points, no bureaucracy, late payment of maybe public administration. We have big deals in this in Italy, for example, that public administration is just paying after half a year or something like this. So also the credit flows for small enterprises are really difficult, sometimes a challenge. So maybe they perceive themselves as the mouse, but they are vital for the economy, the world economy.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of challenges, I have to ask this. Are the challenges faced by small and large companies the same?
Not the same, but both face challenges, actually. And I have just really learned that in Brazil, with Petrobras, you have more than 10 years experience in linkaging small business with large business, and they really see the benefit in numbers. So they are not doing it because they just want to do something nice. They do it because they save a lot of money, because local supply chain generates also advantages in timing. So if you have a Chinese technician to intervene in your supply chain, it might take more time. So better you have a local one. This is what was just reported to me during the lunch. So they really see the benefit. And I also brought an example of Propais. If you can see, the investment with Ecopetrol was more or less $75,000. Ecopetrol puts more than 3 times this number into the project, and that's why they benefit. So they all have challenges. Timing is a big deal for large enterprises. They need exactly this ability of the small enterprise to adapt to the dynamic field and to deliver a new solution, more competitive solution. So it's not the same challenge. The small and medium enterprise have to focus on management, to leverage their management, while the large enterprises maybe have to learn how to better deal with SMEs, and to really reconsider the whole, let's say, supply chain they have on the market.
Mm-hmm. I think you already answered this question, but I'm going to do it anyway. And what are the opportunities for... I'm gonna remake the question with other words. What are the opportunities for small and large companies to cooperate with him in a value chain?
Yeah, it's very similar to what I just said.
Yeah.
I guess the possibility to collaborate, to make sure it is a constant collaboration so that everybody can benefit from it. For large enterprises, they told me it is really saving money. So this is the hard data. The same is for the enterprises. If they increase their sale, it's business for them. There is also the additional factor that normally there is a local development, regional development, more infrastructure, more social sustainability, more competitiveness, better quality of goods and services. So all these things are connected to the flow of combining small and large enterprises to work together.
Okay, and the last question. What do you think an online platform focus on a specific knowledge for international institutions that support small business development?
Yes, it is very important. This is something that we are, like INSME, pushing every day. The platform that delivers good practice approaches that you can take up, recombine and use in your own country, because really there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Many countries, many ecosystems have their added value that can be easily studied. We can avoid to make the same errors as somebody else. And I think the online platforms are the only way to avoid long travel, big expenditure. If it comes to fostering business, this is something that I have not really seen in Brazil so far. You might also want to link to international crowdfunding platforms. Crowdfunding is not only a way to overcome the credit crunch or the credit gap, the money that you need to. It is also a way to do market research analysis, if there is somebody willing to buy your product or not. So I would rather link to platforms that already exist for entrepreneurs, also open innovation platforms, and for the institutional partners, for the suppliers of knowledge, for whom is assisting small and medium enterprises, as for example SEBRAE or others that we have in other countries. I guess it is a very useful tool also to learn. And I had the opportunity to visit SEBRAE's corporate university, and I saw that there is a lot of knowledge. Even I would like to somehow make available to our other members of INSME, and that would be a very good thing to really start with a global platform of good practices. So it is a kind of collection of what went well.
Mais pouquinho para frente. Ok, é seu.
A entrevista é com Tilman Altenburg. Tá certo? Vamos lá. The first question. How can a small business benefit from being part of big companies' supply chain?
Well, I think increasingly business is dominated by large firms and large supply chains. So in the past, maybe small firms developed their own product and sold it on their own. But increasingly, in modern times, most big brand name companies dominate the market. And so for the small companies, there's no really alternative. Most companies will have to adapt to global value chains, to standards, to big quantities that are required by the market, and doing this on their own will not be possible in the long run. So by linking to big companies, small firms can access better market, and they can also benefit from technology transfer, because the big companies have something to offer. They have the brand names, they have the reputation in the market, they have the size, and they have quite often better technologies, and in terms of standards, in terms of hygiene or whatever. And small firms would benefit from the technology transfer that they receive.
Mm-hmm. And what are the differences between developed economy and developing countries regarding to the integration of value chains by the small businesses?
I would say that I'm coming from Germany, and in Germany we don't really have a lot of supplier development programs because for many decades small firms or medium-sized firms are already adapted. So in the automotive value chain they have been, they are used to the standards which are set by the big automotive companies, and so the suppliers to the automotive industries would already have the standards in place. So we don't really have a lot of supplier development programs any longer. We had them some years ago. And then you have some underdeveloped countries maybe in Central America or in Africa, for example, where large firms do not source from the small companies because they are not kind of competitive enough. So also in those very underdeveloped countries, there are not so many supplier development programs. But in countries of a certain degree of industrial development, which are not at the top level of Japan or the US, like Brazil or like Malaysia or like Turkey or like China or Argentina, you have a lot of supplier development programs because the technological gap between what the big companies want and what the small companies can offer is not too big, and it can be closed with some kind of supplier development programs. And we see that companies like IKEA, for example, for the furniture, they set standards. They have a very ambitious standards for all the suppliers that need to be met. But maybe they help the small enterprises for a few weeks or so to adapt, but basically then they leave it to the companies whether they fulfill the requirements or not. But I think in countries where you have lots of very small enterprises and you have some very big companies that are highly competitive, but where the technological gap is large, there you need that kind of supplier development programs where the big companies really help the small ones to catch up.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you a favor?
Mm-hmm.
Try to not look at her.
Oh, that makes it difficult.
Yes.
Okay.
She's beautiful.
Okay.
Ai, ai, ela tá olhando muito ou não? Pouquinho, tá?
Okay.
That's okay.
Was it okay for this first round? Or
yes.
Shall I repeat it?
I think it's
okay. But now, from now on.
Yeah. Try to.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Vamos lá. Bureaucracy and high tax burden are known as the main obstacles to Brazilian social and economic development. Could you tell us successful cases in this theme in your country or in any other country you have visited?
I don't know exactly how the Brazilian situation is right now, but there are these benchmarks of the doing business indicators, for example, that measure how long it takes for a company to register or how complicated it is to make a business contract with another company or so, and or to get a credit. And this is very important to make this less burdensome. But on the other hand, some regulation is needed. So companies do need a kind of legal framework on which to rely. So we need a certain level of business registries. Otherwise, I mean, if everything's unregistered, then you cannot have security in the marketplace. Also, you want to have certain standards. For example, you want to have hygiene standards of companies who are selling food to the public, for example. So certain things need to be fulfilled. And I think what's the important thing is to differentiate between what are necessary and useful regulations and what is just burdensome red tape, which we don't need. And I think what countries do, for example, in the OECD countries, where the big industrialized countries are member states, we have screening processes whereby we see regularly look what kind of regulations are still needed and which ones are not. I think that is something that every country should do because it's a cheap way of becoming competitive.
Eu acho que ele respondeu até essa daqui, das oportunidades, mas eu posso fazer. I'm gonna ask you a second one. I think it's the same thing, but
okay.
You can.
Okay, I can.
I'm gonna rephrase the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
You're asking you to
Yes, for another, for another side, please. Okay. Right
Sorry?
position from
Straight.
Straight.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
So, what can be done to increase the opportunities for the small businesses in countries similar to Brazil?
Just a moment, please. That was okay. Yeah.
Quer que eu pergunte?
Yeah.
Can I ask you again? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What can be done to increase the opportunities for the small businesses in countries similar to Brazil?
I think it would be good to have some kind of public sector supplier development programs that help the small firms. Firstly, or some things the large companies will do anyway. Large companies do not want to do everything in-house in their own company, so they have an interest in outsourcing and looking for suppliers. So this happens on its own, and you don't need a government agency to help doing this. But there are certain things that do not work so well. For example, big companies may not have want to invest a lot of time in looking around and screening what kind of companies are appropriate as potential suppliers. So there could be supplier fairs, for example, where big buyers and small potential suppliers come together and can meet. Or you can have databases or so where you can link both. Then also what you can do is you can arrange a public-private partnership with the big companies. And the big companies would say, okay, we need more suppliers. We are the ones who know the standards. We will define the standards that the small ones have to comply with. But then technical training, for example, can be supplied by public agencies. So, but that requires a good coordination between the big companies and the agencies. And I think the National Supplier Development Program that SEBRAE is developing is a good example of how this can be done.
Could you tell us some good practice on public policy to support the small business that you can adapt to Brazilian scenario?
Yes. Well, for example, Singapore has an interesting program which is called the Local Industry Upgrading Program. And what the government in Singapore did is they encouraged the big company, or basically nudged them a bit to say, okay, we want you to adopt local suppliers. And then they did exactly this, that they sat together with the government and said, okay, what kind of suppliers would we need? The companies do not want governments to pick the potential suppliers, they want to pick their own suppliers, but then they may do an assessment of what the needs are of those suppliers in terms of technological upgrading, and the government can help with this. So to have a program that is jointly owned by the big companies and jointly driven by the companies and the government is something very useful. Ireland is another example. Ireland was a very under-industrialized country 15, 20 years ago, then started to attract electronics business to Ireland, but these were transnational corporations and there was no industrial base. So Ireland also developed a very comprehensive supplier development program and was very successful in building local linkages. So starting first with foreign direct investment as greenfield investment, that means investors who just came in, built their plants and had no relationship with the Irish economy, but then little by little the local linkages were created.